Now, let's talk about labor unions. I get into such a complicated mess when I talk about unions. I never seem to be able to explain myself properly, so I'll let you take a run at it. Labor unions gave us the weekend. I'm not just talking about the wrapper. I'm talking about the actual 37 and a half hours. You got breaks. You can go to the washroom. You get some lunch. You get benefits. You get weekends. Without unions, 16-hour days, no face protections, you're breathing in black lung, you're coughing weakly and expiring in the latter stages of a George Orwell docudrama in mining towns in the North. What is the status and the understanding of labor unions in the free market?
Yeah, okay. Well, it's interesting for me to talk about this because my father, who's deceased now, was a member of the Teamsters Union for at least 15 years. So it's not that I grew up with a silver spoon in my mouth, so I can't sympathize with workers. My father was a Teamster, so let's just to that. All right, now this again is another textbook thing, that first we had these conditions, then labor unions existed, then we had those conditions. So therefore we would never have gotten to those conditions if it hadn't been for labor unions, is the fallacy here. So let's just go through what's the logic of a labor union and how does it all work. Could it be the case, could it really be the case that the reason Bangladesh is poor is that they don't have enough labor unions? Could that really be it? That all they need to do is just organize? Or could it be that the reason that we were poor in the year 1000, let's say, is that we didn't have collective bargaining? And that if we'd had collective bargaining, then everybody would have a television, even though there were no televisions for anyone. So it's in some ways analogous to the discussion that we had about child labor. You can't distribute something that doesn't exist. And so, of course, we're going to see terrible conditions at a time when the entire society was desperately poor. And, you had to work extremely hard just to live a hand-to-mouth existence. What generally happens, like, in other words, if I want to get 2 days off, if I don't want to work 7 days a week, I need to live in a society that is productive enough to produce enough stuff to sustain me in my life with only 5 days worth of my labor, that I could exchange 5 days worth of my labor and I would have the purchasing power to go into that economy and take enough stuff to sustain me. If I'm not living in an economy like that, then I have to work 7 days a week. No matter what a labor union tries to do for me, if they try to give me the weekend off, I'll get another job on the weekend. I still need the stuff, is the point. So a friend of mine named Ben Powell, who's a professor at Texas Tech University, went down to Guatemala and he visited some places that were known to be so-called sweatshops. And he asked the workers, he said, now, given that your employer does not care the form that your compensation takes, he'll give you all cash if that's what you want, or he'll give you half cash and half happier working environment, or 1/4 cash and 4 hours a day you get a massage. He does not care. He's indifferent. He's got an amount that he's willing to pay for labor, and the distribution of it, he doesn't care what form it takes. So Ben Powell was asking these workers themselves, if you could have a somewhat lower salary, but conditions would be better, or then he would ask them separately, you would get this many vacation days a week or a year, and then he asked them each one, I'm pitting your money versus a little bit less money, but this benefit. Stefan, it was overwhelming. It was basically almost every single question he asked, 95+% said, no way. I almost said, no way, Jose, but that might be insensitive. They said, no way, we want the money. And that's exactly where a lot of people were for a long time in the United States. We want the money. Yes, our lives are tough, but my assessment of the basket of goods that are available to me right now is, I want the cash. Then as again, the economy becomes more productive. Entrepreneurs reinvest profits into capital goods that can make my labor more productive. I have more bargaining power on my side. I can command a higher wage. Well, then I can opt for more leisure. I could work and keep earning, but you know what? I would actually rather not do that. I mean, almost any of us, almost anybody listening to this could be working more. You could get a second or third or fourth job. You could, but you've chosen You've opted for more leisure instead of that. That's because we're rich enough to exercise that option. But when you're not, you just want the cash. So when a labor union says we demand, and everybody or some government law says the conditions have to be such and such, what you're doing is simply prematurely bringing about something that would have occurred anyway, but now you're giving people a basket of goods they would not have chosen. They would have chosen just the cash. So that's really what's happening. And then also, what happens to the people who don't belong to the labor union? Well, those people, we can't just call them non-union workers. That would be dispassionate, right? I mean, we call entrepreneurs robber barons. What are we going to call people who are so unfortunate as not to be in labor unions? Yeah, they're scabs. I mean, how dehumanizing is that? Doesn't the left object to dehumanization? How dehumanizing? It's like something you pick off your skin. Like, this is like nothingness, these people. But think about, well, what is their situation when they are not allowed to, when they want to work, they would voluntarily choose to work in a particular field, but a union has made clear that that will not happen because either they're blocking them out, or they're antagonizing or attacking them, as has happened in some cases, or they've made the wage so high with the employer that it, just like with a minimum wage, it automatically reduces the number of people, the demand for labor that firm has, the quantity of labor that it will demand. And so what is this person who's trained to be in industry A, what does he now have to do? He's now going to go work in industry B, a lower industry, where he wastes the skills he's acquired. And now there's going to be a big bunch of people displaced from industry A down in industry B, lowering the wages there. Oh, we'll just organize labor unions there. Okay, but that always involves exclusion. So now those people have to go to industry C. So there is a waste of all the skills these people would have had if they'd been able to work in the industries they were trained for. So yes, it's true that if you're in a labor union, you earn more than you would have otherwise if you're one of the lucky ones. Just like if you're one of the lucky ones who doesn't lose his job with the minimum wage. But a lot of people are excluded from jobs entirely or forced out of industries. And the result on net, Richard Vedder and Lowell Galloway at Ohio University did a study where they came up with some, I don't recall the exact number, but it was an overwhelming figure in terms of the deadweight loss, how much people who are excluded suffer. And it totally swamps the concentrated benefits that the labor union people won. So, and moreover, in the United States, I can't speak for Canada, but in the United States, the amount of membership, the percentage of membership in labor unions never really got above 33%, about 1/3 at its height. And it was usually less than that. So if you're going to say that labor unions brought about our better living standards and working conditions, how could that be if they were never even close to being a majority of workers? There must have been some other factor at work there. And some of us would say that's the free market.
Well, if you want more money, increase your value. I mean, this is one of these, like, you can then get mad and you can throw things and you can call your union bosses and you can threaten strikes. And in a free market, people can strike, people can quit, people can collectively bargain. But if you want to make more money, the idea that you call up your politician or go and get your union members to scream at people and so on, it seems kind of lazy and passive, just at a sort of personal level. Like, why don't you just up your value? Why don't you learn something about the business? Why don't you learn something about sales or marketing? Or why don't you just, you don't have to go to a night course, you can study it on your own. But why don't you, like, if you're a bouncer and you want to be in the band, learn an instrument. Don't just yell at people to make the bouncer part of the band for no reason. And this kind of off-sourcing or outsourcing of personal responsibility for economic value. If you are worth a lot to an employer, you can make a lot of demands, right? I mean, there's a reason why Brad Pitt gets $15 million a movie, because he can add way more than that in terms of opening the movie. So if you don't want to be an extra and you want to be Brad Pitt, I don't know, get a hair transplant, do some sit-ups, learn how to act better or whatever. But my sort of feeling is, to decomplicate a lot of these issues, because when people get into these issues that I talk to outside of these kinds of conversations, they get very confused. It gets very complicated. To me, it's very simple. Nobody gets to use a gun except in self-defense. That to be like non-aggression principle, keep your promises, right? Do not initiate force, keep your promises. Very, very simple basis of common law. When it comes to unions, sure, have a union, free association. You can all get together and you can threaten to quit, and then you can try and get the boss to pay you more. That's perfectly valid. That's all free market stuff. But you cannot hold the boss hostage by disallowing anyone else to do your job. That is the initiation of force. The boss can fire everyone and replace, and that's a big deal. That's a big deal. You got retraining, you got hiring costs. Some of the hirees won't work out. You might get a bad reputation. You're going to interrupt your customer flow, especially this just-in-time stuff for manufacturing. If you interrupt your flow of goods to a car dealership, they can't wait. And so they're going to have to go find someone else. So if the entire collective, and there are jerk bosses just as there are jerk employees and jerk everyone, if there's a jerk boss out there, then the people need to be able to organize and threaten a mass quitting. And that to me is perfectly part of the free market. But they cannot prevent him from hiring other people, because that's his exercise of free association. And this holding hostage, where you've got people beating up other people who want to come and work, that is the initiation of the use of force. That's when the labor union goes from advocacy to thuggery.